APAP is located in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., on the ancestral lands of the Piscataway and the Anacostan people, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. I would like to pay my respect to the Piscataway and the Anacostan elders, both past and present. Please welcome to the conference Maria Hansen.
Good day to you all, and welcome to this Fieldwide Conversation on the climate crisis, performing arts touring, and our future. This is a joint session of APAP, ISPA, Chamber Music America, and the Drama League, and it is my pleasure to welcome you. My name is Maria Hansen, and I'm Executive Director of ILIA. My visual description: I'm a white woman with glasses, brown hair with some gray, blue sweater on, and I'm in my home office in the Netherlands. I work for ILIA, which is a globally connected European network for higher arts education, working for art universities across the globe, based in Amsterdam. As it happens, this is the first joint session that these four networks have created, and that is a great cause for celebration after so many years of bringing all of you to New York for the January conferences. In the next 75 minutes, we're going to be talking about a topic that is not new and that somehow keeps coming back every year with more urgency: the climate crisis. As you will hear in this session, there is a clear call to action and quite a lot of ideas at our disposal if only we take responsibility and make this topic a central priority. Our goal today is not to shame and not to provide all the answers, but to identify essential elements for the future. We want to inspire you, and we also want to inspire APAP, ISPA, CMA, and the Drama League to do the necessary agenda setting around climate change. Maybe this needs to be done together. I'm thrilled to welcome here today a high caliber cast of speakers. Alison Tickle, founder and CEO of Julie's Bicycle. Raj Patel, acoustician at APAP. Musician Rebecca McFall, who is a founding member of the Fry Street Quartet. Musician Fabian Almazan, who's founder of Biofolio Records. Chris Lorway, Executive Director of Stanford Live, and Colette Brennan, CEO of the Abbotsford Convent Foundation. I will introduce them as I go along, and you can read more information on them on the APAP conference platform. A little bit about myself. You can read my bio on that platform, so I won't repeat all that, but having worked in the performing arts for more than 30 years, I started working on climate change after hearing about Julie's Bicycle at a conference many years ago in the Netherlands. As managing director of a large theater and a concert hall in Haarlem in the Netherlands, I realized we could do more. To start, we covered the sizable roof with solar cells. We then got 8 other cultural organizations in the city to join us in reaching an environmental certification, the Green Key, involving the entire organization. Now at ILIA, I'm working on climate change again. Together with several other European networks, we're involved in the SHIFT project, which is co-funded by the Erasmus Plus program of the European Union. SHIFT is about the UN Sustainability Development Goals, not all of them. That would be too much, but about 3 of them. ILIA has the lead on climate change. Our focus starts with ourselves, the networks. What can we as networks do to be more environmentally sustainable? Networks come with a huge carbon footprint. We travel all over the world. Can we reduce that? Can we do our work differently? COVID-19 has shown us that we can. Where does that leave us? The second priority of SHIFT is to share knowledge with the field, and that is why I'm so happy to be here. Before we get started, I want to invite you to get active in the chat. Share your stories about engagement around climate change and how that has affected your work. Do you have questions for us? Are you looking for partners? The chat will be a bit of a parallel universe for us here. We cannot see it, but the wonderful team at APAP will feed your questions to us. It's quite a busy panel, but I will do my best to integrate your questions. If I can't, please contact any of us via the conference platform. We're happy to continue the conversation. So let's get going. Our session has 3 sets. We start by setting the stage with Alison Tickle and Julie's bicycle. Where are we at in 2020? We start by setting the stage with Alison Tickle and Julie's bicycle. Where are we at in 2021? And what is the amazing Julie's bicycle doing now? Alison, welcome.
Thank you so much, Maria, and thank you all so much for having me today. I'm really honoured to be part of this journey that you will be, or that many of you are already taking. I'm going to talk a little bit about the issue, then a little bit about my and my company's response to it, and then hopefully leave some thoughts and some ideas for you. I'm not talking specifically about touring, but we've done a lot of work on that, so we can pick that up. I'm a white woman. I've got, it's called in this country, dirty blonde hair, a pair of glasses, and I'm speaking from my home in Oxford. My walls are white and I have a plant behind me. So I'm going to share my screen because I'm going to romp through some slides. It just makes it a little bit easier. So here we go. And I'm just, I'm putting them onto full screen. So there we go. So I thought I'd just start very briefly with the problem and the latest science. And the problem, of course, is climate change. Now, I always refer to it not as climate change, I refer to it as the climate and ecological crisis, which puts it where it needs to be. About 20 minutes ago, I read the news, and it told me that last year, 2020, in spite of COVID-19, was actually the hottest year since global temperatures began, one of the 6 most hottest years in recent history. And if we look at what that actually means, this planet has lived in glorious equilibrium for millennia. The records show that 800,000 years ago to very recently, our planet lived in a state of relative calm and relative temperature equilibrium. And it is very, very recently that the temperature has shot up. And you'll see this picture by NASA. For those of you who can't see it clearly, it is a temperature, it's a graph that shows a very steep rise since 1950 of temperatures of very, very speedy. So this phenomenon, while it's been building for the last 200 years or so, has become very acute in many of our lifetimes. And just for those of you who are in the US, every single region is profoundly affected already. The most recent assessment, the climate assessment for the states, which was produced in 2018, shows very widespread increased heat, drought, insect outbreaks, breakdowns in ecosystems and biodiversity, erosion around coastal areas, and extreme weather. There are differentiation in weather patterns locally, but the whole continent is quite seriously affected. So that we do have quite an issue on our hands. We're combining this with culture wars, and of course, 2020 has been really difficult, and it doesn't look like it's going to be much easier in 2021, where we have a smorgasbord of issues around who believes what around different areas, and climate change has always been highly political. Why is this? Fundamentally, because climate change is a cultural issue. And culture is so critical in this. It has not been part of the climate conversations, but culture is how we feel the world around us. It is the communities that we gather around us, and it is our future. Culture is so profound. It's our heritage, our history, our communities, our outlooks, our behaviors, our values, our identities. And of course, the arts express all of that very, very clearly. And so now we have a choice. Do we wait for climate breakdown, or do we work to create a flourishing earth where culture is connected to communities and regenerating our living planet? And this was the question that I asked myself when I set up Julie's Bicycle about 13 years ago, realizing that culture was an incredible, magnificent force to power climate action. We look at this through 4 key themes: decarbonization, i.e. changing how we source our energy from fossil fuels to clean sources, getting rid of waste altogether. There is in nature, there is no such idea of waste. So everything is regenerative. Really focusing on regenerating, rejuvenating our natural systems. Underpinned, all of it has to be underpinned by justice. So many people at the forefront of climate impacts are those who are the least culpable for the problems, and actually are going to be affected the most. So justice in every dimension and aspect really does need to be our watchword. We focus on learning and skills. The first thing to do is to understand what our impacts are. We did a music industry carbon footprint in 2007, and that created a template for really trying to understand the nuts and bolts of environmental impacts, and then to take action to address them. We've developed a set of what are called the creative green tools. They're carbon footprinters for all aspects of cultural and artistic production, including tours. Please do go and have a look at them. They're free. We've taken all our research and we've made it into resources for people to have a practical approach to all of their work, whether that be digital impacts, whether it be audience travel, whether it be building energy impacts, whether it be festivals, whatever. We've got a huge resource there, and taking action. We've seen a flowering of responses to this. I have found, particularly over the last 2 years, that the inspiration, the creativity and the joy that people have experienced through taking action has been boundless. So really, this is a wonderful opportunity for people to start to rethink what they're doing. Is it enough? Well, of course it is not. We're trying to solve 19th century problems with 20th century solutions for 21st century issues. So we really need to look at leadership and what does that mean to all of us? Julie's Bicycle has been convening a global network of artists and cultural leaders, something called Creative Climate Leadership, alongside a big emphasis on policy. In the States, you have this incredible opportunity around a Green Deal, particularly now you've got a majority with Biden and the Democrats who've got a really ambitious plan for climate action. I think that now is the chance for the cultural sector to get on the front foot and lobby for a Green Deal. We're at a crossroads. We have never been at such a portentous moment, for not just because of the climate and ecological crisis, but because of the crisis in truth and justice and democracy. Now is the chance, the moment that we've been waiting for, which is to take this space. And I just pulled together 7 key principles. One is work together. The arts are an ecosystem. Don't focus on just the artists or just the buildings. Work together. This incredible community have got all the answers. The second is work through the key, most important themes. With justice as your guiding principle, think about net zero carbon, zero waste, and rejuvenating, replenishing nature. Third principle, evidence and data, map to the science. So what you want to do is to build a really strong picture of what you need to do, making sure that it conforms to what the scientists are telling us needs to be done. 4, share and accelerate your learning. 5, empower leadership wherever it is. It will not always be with people who have taken on leadership positions. So often we have found that wonderful, incredible, courageous leadership is happening from people who are not your official leaders. 6, reach beyond state borders. In fact, reach beyond national borders. There's an incredibly exciting international movement of change that's taking place. And the bigger the community here, the more likely we are to do wonderful things together. And finally, celebrate. Bring in the joy, bring in the life, bring in the creativity, bring in the collective wisdom to change the world. We change culture, and I really believe this. Culture changes the world. Thank you.
So thank you, Alison. You are a vitamin pill for us all. I didn't get to introduce you properly, and you have been doing this for 14 years, Alison, and you are a cellist actually by training. And it's incredible to see what you've done in these years, and how Julie's Bicycle has become such a gold standard worldwide. I encourage all of our listeners and viewers to check out the website. Indeed, there's a lot of open source content that you can use and get started on this mission. Alison, I've been holding some of these conversations at some of these conferences in the past years. And one of the big hurdles continues to be the business model of needing to travel in order to make the money. And, you know, we all know about smaller and very large organizations chasing each other around the continents, around the world. How sustainable, that isn't sustainable anymore, but what can those groups do to reinvent? What do you think?
So I think we've got to be bold, and in these really hard times. I mean, both the US and the UK and many parts of Europe are really struggling at the moment. And I want to first of all pay full homage to that, and we do have, all of us have an obligation to do whatever we can to support our creatives. They're the most valuable thing that we have. But looking beyond the COVID crisis, I think there is an opportunity. In fact, it's an imperative to really rethink how we are moving around the world. Now we've got to we've got lots of touring top tips for people, and I'm very happy to put some links in for that. But I think that there is something greater, there's a greater opportunity here for us, which is to ask ourselves if this very helter-skelter approach to very fast impact, very rapid movement around the world is what we really want. And there's a lot of thinking going on around what makes for well-being, both for our audiences but also for our artists. So touring communities coming together, tour circuits being rethought, slower travel, local labor, local work, so that you're also supporting local economies. Obviously doing whatever you can to reduce your impact. So what your shows are powered by, what your kind of materials that you're using. Always, if you can, measure your impacts before you go around your tour circuits so that you can make them really efficient. And finally, and the very, very last option should be around something called offsets, which is around paying for the environmental impacts that you make. And we are, on January the 20th, we're releasing an offset guide, which gives you the options for how you might offset some of your travel. But the main thing to say is that this is an incredible opportunity to ask ourselves as a community how we can move into this space thinking a little bit differently, and using science, how we can remodel our industry so that it is in tune with the needs of Mother Earth.
Wonderful, thank you. Alison, we're going to bring you back at the very end. There are perhaps some questions for you in the chat, so have a look at that. And there is a request for you to share the 7 principles again. So if you could put those in the chat, that would be great. We are ready to move on now to our next set, when we will talk with colleagues who are making a difference now. And here we're bringing in Raj, Rebecca, and Fabian. And first up is Raj.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Welcome, Raj.
Hi, Maria.
Hi there. So everyone, this is Raj Patel. He is an Arab Fellow specializing in arts and culture venues. In his work, arts, culture, science, technology, and engineering often merge in addressing design, societal, and operational problems. Welcome, and thank you for being here today. I know you have worked with Julie's Bicycle in the past, and your perspective on the now is really interesting to us. I want to take some time with you to look at what drives change. What change have you seen and are you seeing when it comes to venues?
Thanks, Maria. For the audience, I'm an Asian Indian male with short black hair, wearing a black sweater and a grey jacket against a green background. Maria, to answer that question, I'd say maybe four things that are really important. The publishing of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals has been very important in terms of sort of shifting the goalposts. Those goals have been incorporated into many funding sources, whether they're governmental, private, or philanthropic, and so that's starting to impact the sector as a whole now, perhaps more than ever. There's been a huge positive impact of arts organisations sharing examples of improved, sustainable, net zero carbon design approaches in both design, renovation, operation and maintenance of buildings. So the learning around the world is going up very significantly, and the ability for people to take on board those ideas, to adopt them, to adapt them and change them is really important. There's increasing examples of how sustainable design is achievable in new buildings in a straightforward and much more inexpensive ways. And also to the infrastructure and urban environments, both open spaces and also around our arts buildings. And the last thing is the ability for arts leaders to be more empowered to support sustainable design practice through the whole life cycle of activity, and seeing more support for that.
Mm. So we're seeing quite a lot of larger scale and potentially expensive actions that are possible for venues in sustainability. How would you prioritize the change? What are you seeing in our industry and related industries, perhaps?
Yeah. There's a lot of attention-grabbing headlines out there, particularly arts buildings or other new types of buildings that incorporate large-scale, usually very visible in a photo-worthy opportunity, sustainable management, particularly around energy or water use. There is a lot of opportunity in new build to create sustainable design outcomes, but the challenge on base building costs and return on investment continues to be quite a significant stumbling block. Many projects have quite good intentions to start, but cost-saving measures often put a lot of pressure on arts institutions and presenters during the process of trying to deliver them. The entire ecosystem, I think, needs to get much better at carrying these items through to delivery. There's a significant amount that can be done, has already been achieved incrementally through operational change, renovation projects, and these stories are being shared much more frequently within the arts industry. Taking action on inefficient resources, for example, changing your lighting to LED for better power usage, improving very simple things like water use, water leakage, water recycling, and grey water, rainwater reusage, improved maintenance for building efficiency. All of those small things start to add up, especially as you roll them up at a local, regional, national, and global level. So everybody has somewhere that they can start, I think. Some of the challenges with those latter categories has been how to fund them. Traditionally, they've been less desirable things to fund or fund from a sponsorship perspective because it's hard to put your name. It was previously perhaps very difficult to persuade a donor to put their name against those sorts of things, particularly because they're less visible. But I think that's changing very significantly now.
Yeah, tell us a little more about that, because is money not also a driver in the change?
Yeah, I mean, money's a huge driver, as is ongoing reporting of sustainability targets. So perhaps to frame that, as I said earlier, the building industry, particularly on the costing and the supply side, has traditionally been quite slow to change. The built environment advocates, architects, engineers, designers, and so on have been trying to advocate sustainable design for a long time. First day cost of delivery of a building or an improvement on the first day is often prioritized over long-term economic and sustainable benefits, which are hard to hold in focus when there are budget constraints on the design of a building or a renovation. I think many projects suffer from death from 1,000 cuts, even at the very, very earliest stages of a project, because a cost consultant finds sustainability-related issues hard to quantify, construction managers or contractors find it hard to price, and the uncertainty leads to higher pricing being suggested early on, even though that may not be true if design is allowed to develop a bit more. So as leaders, we need to push very hard, I think, to make sure that the sustainable agenda stays top of mind and that cost cutting doesn't erode those too early. There's also, as I said, a focus on day one outcomes. Will my building achieve X LEED rating when it opens? The question around whether or not it will achieve the same LEED rating in 1 year or 5 years or 10 years hasn't really been on the agenda yet. And of course, operational management, good use of energy, upkeep all play into that. I think what we'll start to see very soon is rating systems adopt a more long-term measurement approach, and that will start to change the industry quite substantially. And I think that will allow existing buildings to get rated if they want to for their sustainability performance, and hopefully it will attract more funding to the ecosystem in general. So in countries where governments are funding projects, we're seeing more focus on sustainable outcomes as a whole because it's fiscally responsible, because the arts are embedded in their communities, and as Alison said, it galvanizes a wider group of people to be more sustainable in general because the arts are a trusted cultural resource. Also, many funders of private companies are requiring those companies to become aligned with the UN SDGs, and that requirement is being passed down, so we're seeing a much higher demand for that on the agenda. It's a good investment for everybody if sponsorship continues to drive sustainable outcomes, so as well as support for programming. So those two things are starting to come together, I think.
Yeah, I really recognize that. Certainly here in Europe, government funding, of course, is a strong factor in the business model. And we're now seeing a huge push from funders to adhere to sustainability requirements in the grant programs. There's also the Green Deal here and the new Bauhaus initiative, which opens up a lot of opportunities for a more holistic approach to building. So that's really interesting that this is becoming a driver. Raj, how do you see the role of an organization like Julie's Bicycle? What has been the significance of the kind of work, their early work on climate change?
I think it's absolutely pivotal. Julie's Bicycle have had a huge impact since their inception in 2006, 2007. The early green guides that they published started to provide the tools that people needed, venues needed, and arts organisations needed to start to take action. And governments more widely, not just in the UK where they were published, but much more broadly, have taken much more notice. The reporting and the case studies, and of course the amount of money saved has really helped to provide the value stories that are needed to drive things forward. International partnerships, or in fact the inspiration from Julie's Bicycle for other organisations to form, for example, like the Broadway Green Alliance, has expanded the scope and the reach. So I think it's going to continue to become increasingly important. That grassroots activity and the sharing of good value stories is hugely important.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you something else, Raj. In my world, the younger generations, the students are a huge force. How do you see them as a driver of change?
I think this is something that's becoming increasingly important and lots of people are starting to pay attention to. Younger generation has a much greater demand for sustainable outcomes and also for seeing them achieved. So they're asking for a level of transparency that hasn't necessarily need to be provided in the past. They're making very specific decisions about which organizations to interact with based on whether or not they're achieving their stated sustainability aims. And I think that demand's only going to increase over time. I think there's also quite a strong connection there to other forms of audience engagement. Young people obviously are very interested in the digital components of how their arts experience is curated. So this sort of tying in of the user between their interactions at home, through their mobile device on a journey to a venue, in the public and urban realm, at the building and in the art is increasing. So they see those things as being integral to the same challenge and the same solution.
Yeah. And Raj, we don't have a lot of time for this one, and it's a big topic, but you are, of course, involved in a lot of new building projects. Having been there myself, I know this can be really problematic because of the complexity of the decision-making dynamics. Where do you see it going wrong?
Yeah, I touched a little bit on this a bit earlier, but the design industry has been advocating for change for a long time. The construction industry generally has been slower to change, but the gap between those two things is getting smaller, but it's still there. I think arts leaders feel a lot of pressure. Their funders, their architects, their design teams, the construction industry are all saying slightly different things. Money is a very strong driving factor. Each party has a slightly different end goal, which comes into more focus, especially when things get tight. So leadership advocacy for supporting the desired outcomes is key at every stage of any kind of design and implementation process. Aligning with those who are going to help you achieve those outcomes is very important. And that might not be the most famous voice or the loudest voice in the room necessarily. Using an example as an acoustic and theatre consultant, I can tell you that when things don't work in a building, when it opens, most clients don't call their funder or call their architect. They call me up and say, why was this decision made during the design of this project? Why didn't you do this? And it's often because cost-cutting exercise eliminated the items that weren't seen as essential or that could be bought later or could be dealt with later. Many of the project constituents don't think from a very human-centric operational level. How do you make a building work for the constituents? So we try to be the eyes and ears for our arts constituents to do that. But leadership having a strong alignment to those outcomes and to the delivery of those outcomes is as important as getting the building itself delivered.
Yeah, I think that's a really important message, taking control and reducing dependency on the other and staying in the driver's seat. And Raj, I fear we have to stop there. But what struck me really is that the aspect of leadership is crucial in all of the stories we're going to hear today, taking control and ownership of the commitment to the topic and really saying, no, I want it done this way. And this is a core priority for my organization. So this is a perfect moment to thank you, Raj, and now to bring in our next two speakers, both artists who have taken control of integrating climate change into their work. I want to welcome Fabian Almazan and Rebecca McFall. Welcome, Fabian and Rebecca. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Rebecca McFall, the Fry Street Quartet. I'm a white woman with brown hair wearing a yellow t-shirt and a black blazer, and I'm sitting in my home study in Logan, Utah.
Hi everyone, my name is Fabian Almazan. I was born in Cuba, para todos que hablan español. Hola. I am here in Perth, Western Australia, where it is very early. Um, it's kind of hard to visually describe myself. I haven't had to do that very often, but I'm not white, I'm not black, I'm Cuban, I have curly black hair, and I wear glasses, and I'm wearing a green shirt.
Thank you. And Fabian, let's start with you. Thank you for getting up in the middle of the night to be with us today. Fabian, you are a pianist, jazz musician, composer, and founder of Biofolio Records. Tell us about that and about what drove you to create the Biofolio, and how have you experienced working on environmental sustainability?
Sure. I mean, first of all, I just want to thank you for letting me participate in this. I think this is wonderful. Growing up as a minority in the, well, I was born in Cuba, and growing up as a minority in the US, I often had weird experiences where, for example, teachers of mine would have a hard time understanding that as a Hispanic male, I was very much in love with classical music and jazz, and that I cared about the environment. So there have always been, I felt, kind of inaccurate stereotypes of what it means to be a minority, a Hispanic minority growing up. So because of that, I've always just kind of felt a little bit lonely, and that's the main reason I started Biofolio Records, because I wanted to bring together people like myself that are very passionate about the arts and music, as well as climate change and the environment. Um, I had always felt, as is evident by what we're witnessing now, that science denial can be quite deadly. So I've always tried to find the balance between that innate urge that I have, that sort of calling to that we're running out of time and we need to do something, and also treat people with respect, not being too preachy about what we're trying to do, which we spoke about this earlier. You should really have to tailor the message to whoever's listening, which is something that unfortunately the fossil fuel industry has a lot of expertise on. So yeah, I feel like I'm rambling, but just thank you for letting me be a part of this.
What is the Biofolio? Because that's your that's such a great thing to even show us.
Sure, I happen to have one here. Coming from the perspective of a touring musician, I I really wanted to find a way that we could help everyone. What I have found as a label owner is that jazz fans, particularly, are very nostalgic about that sort of collecting mentality, and which I can't blame them for. I've listened to a lot of albums myself, uh, and I also wanted to help the artists while we're touring. It's very difficult to make a living as a musician nowadays, and so I needed some sort of physical product that the artist could sell that was more environmentally friendly, and this is it, Biofolio. This particular one is, I think, beautiful. The artwork is from Rajna Swaminathan, and yeah, it's made entirely out of paper. Uh, it's based on origami. It folds out like this. I don't know if I can capture the whole thing there.
We can see
It's
it.
yeah, it's FSC certified paper. It has a vibrant artwork and a download code inside, so that there's no plastic involved. And the joke that I always make on gigs is that if you don't like the music, you can just recycle it. But
There you go.
yeah, this is the Biofolio. And biophilia, for all of you who aren't aware of the term, I became aware of it through reading E.O. Wilson's works. And it's a theory of our innate attraction towards other living things in life in general, which is why we pay crazy amounts of money to live next to Central Park, and there are zoos in every major city. That's a play on word, Biofolio.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to just switch to Rebecca for a moment, and might come back to you in a second with a question. But Rebecca, you are a chamber music musician with a passion for nature and the environment. There's a project that you have worked on for many years, Rising Tide, the Crossroads project, which hopes to confront a planet under siege and a future in peril. New York Times called it a performance piece that encourages people to live sustainably. Tell us what drives you to work in this area.
Well, that project began now a long time ago, and honestly, it came just as I was turning 40, and kind of realizing that I was waiting for the adults to do something. that somehow reaching that number made me realize, as an educator and an artist, that I was clearly entering middle age, and that maybe I shouldn't be waiting for other people to do it anymore. So that project is about a 75-minute performance piece that was written by a physicist and is performed by a physicist as well, interspersed with imagery from photojournalists and artists and some scientific graphs, and original music that the quartet commissioned from a wonderful composer and friend named Laura Kaminsky. And so living into that project, there's a refrain throughout it that we come back to, and that refrain is, the time has come for us to believe what we know. And, you can't, be on stage and do that and not, be aware of the ways in which the way you're living does not line up with the message. And certainly as a traveling musician and as an educator too, I'm just, have been very aware of needing to do more. And so being a part of this panel is a great honor. I want to echo what Fabian said in that way. And I'm so excited to see support coming from presenting organizations and from resource hubs like Julie's Bicycle and Music Declares Emergency as well, so that as artists, we can safely bring up these concerns and not be, we're always worried about our own sustainability in this field. And so you want to be easy to work with, not a pain. And yet you also, I want to, for one, move my beloved industry into ways of working that shine a light on this crisis so that we can come together to normalize this predicament in our cultural spaces. And for us to go about doing what we do in ways that are healthy.
Yeah. So for both of you, I'm really, really happy that you're part of this panel because you're telling a story, you're integrating your the love of the climate and the environment into your artistic practice. What do you need from the people that are listening to this, all of whom are colleagues in the performing arts industry? Fabian, what do you need?
Honestly, the most basic thing that I need is for people to do some critical thinking on their own, to not fall prey to white men with a lot of money. Just think for yourself, do what you need to do to take care of your family, which ultimately, I'm sure the realization you're going to have is that this climate crisis will impact everyone, and that it's in your benefit, whether it be through the way that you choose to vote for politicians or your individual behaviors. It benefits us all if we do some critical thinking. And money, of course. We can use money.
All right. And Rebecca?
I guess I need us to be willing to be uncomfortable and ask for what we need to live in a way that lines up with our values, and to support each other, to make a commitment to support each other as we do this. We don't have all the answers, but we do have wonderful imaginations as artists, and we can create networks to move these kinds of efforts forward. So in every chamber music society program, I would love to see a climate commitment and what they're doing to a lot of things that have already been already mentioned, block booking, and just creating hubs so that we can take this further.
All right. So thank you both. And I realized we could talk for a long, long time, but it is time to segue now to our final set. And here I'm happy to introduce you to Chris Lorway and Colette Brennan.
Thanks for having us. It's great to be here to be part of this conversation. I think being here in Silicon Valley in California, we're certainly on the front lines with drought and wildfires to really understand the incredible impact that the climate is having on our state and certainly our country and the world.
Chris, could you just visually introduce yourself?
Sure, yes. My name is Chris Lorway. I'm Executive Director of Stanford Live. I'm sitting in my home office in Redwood City. I have brown hair, a prematurely white beard, and I'm wearing a blue shirt.
Right, and I'm asking Colette to do the same before we come back to you, Chris. I'm also introducing Colette Brennan, who is in Melbourne, also up very early. CEO at the Abbotsford Convent Foundation. Colette, could you introduce yourself?
Yes, hello everyone. I'm living and working on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation in Naarm, which is now known as Melbourne, Australia. I'm in my home office. I've got brown hair, white skin, white glasses, a purple shirt, and some artworks behind me. Absolutely thrilled to be here.
Great. Thank you. And Colette is my co-reflector in this conversation. And so take an opportunity to chime in. That'll come back in a little bit. But first, we want to hear from Chris Lorway, who is at Stanford Live and is a colleague with a long and impressive record in the performing arts. He comes to us today to tell us about an initiative that is new and that speaks to many of the things that we have addressed today. Chris, can you tell us in a nutshell?
Sure, thanks, Maria. First off, I want to say that I don't think we can be having a talk about climate and the environment without referencing our Indigenous brothers and sisters around the world, whose lifelong work has been to sustain and take care of the earth. And I think, certainly as we reflect upon ways in which we can make changes, we go to those teachings and talk to people within that community and elders to get some insight as to how to be better at doing this. I think that as we sort of think about international touring in particular, there's at a time when we see nationalism rising around the world, I think international touring is absolutely essential and international collaboration and connection. But I do think there's times that we're in now that we need to rethink about how this is done. Early in the summer, I received an email from David Dower at Arts Emerson, who had been having conversations with a number of colleagues. And there was the idea of putting together almost a bit of a think tank called the International Presenters Group, that was focused on tackling some of these issues as we sort of think about what the world looks like post-COVID, and how we might take a minute to reflect on and think about ways in which we can make change in our industry. And this whole idea of movement and travel is certainly a key component of that. Thinking about ways in which we, as Alison indicated, we can slow things down a little bit. There are certain things in our industry, like, for example, exclusivity, that rule out the possibility of really having important connections with artists and community. So often, for example, in the Bay Area, we have Cal Performances, we have the San Francisco Symphony, we have SF Jazz, we have Stanford Live. And what we're trying to think about, move more towards, is this idea of how we collectively as a community invite an artist in to spend more time with us, as opposed to the traditional, let's just pop in for a night and do a gig. And it's a very different way of thinking about that, and something that's not going to be easy or quick. But I think that the more that we can create that stickiness and connect artists to community and slow down the process, the better it will be for us, for the artist, and ultimately for the planet. I also want to acknowledge the idea of funding, to go to Raj's point, and even something that Alison said, the idea of purchasing climate credits and creating more sustainable buildings is something that we think about all the time. But I think we also have to identify that being able to do so comes with a certain amount of privilege. In that a lot of people can barely afford a plane ticket, let alone afford additional money for carbon offsets, or can little afford rent for a space, and then have to add on all the different sustainable things on top of it. It actually is probably a funding question where we have to go out to the people who are funding and say, if this is a priority for us, how do we find additional resources so that we're not tapping an already stressed system? I also think there's a huge degree of accountability where as we enter into these conversations and make commitments in the same way that governments are expected to do it on a very large level, how do we as individual institutions and individual artists think about accountability, and maybe even put it front and center? Maybe through your communications or on your website, you actually show that I traveled to this place and I bought carbon offsets, or I installed solar panels in my building, or for the outdoor concerts I'm doing, I'm using a recyclable program or I've switched to LED lighting. How do we actually articulate our accountability to ensure that that everybody is sort of thinking about this? And then finally, I think that the power of art in terms of initiating conversation and having people really be thoughtful about how they approach things. And I always take the lead of the artist, and we're seeing some incredible work coming out, whether it's Robin Frohart's Plastic Bag Store, whether it's Alana Mitchell has this great piece called Seasick, which is all about rising acidity levels in the ocean. These are all really important, critical conversations that the more you introduce these concepts and these ideas to your audiences, the more hopefully people will join you on that climate journey. Having just come out of a year where masks became political, I really fear that as we go into the climate discussion, that it'll be quickly politicized and split the country in half. And so I think as we look at our respective governments and our communities, how do we use artists as a way of initiating the dialogue and helping people actually come along on the journey, as opposed to making them feel they have to be on one side or the other? So these are all things we're thinking about and considering as we sort of forge ahead going forward.
Chris, are you seeing this initiative as being something that's limited to North America? How are you seeing it develop in the future?
Well, I think as we're having our conversations, we're really interested in ensuring that this is a global conversation, so that expectations are set amongst colleagues around the world, and that we create a value system and a set of shared values that we all understand and buy into. But at the same time, we don't want this to be seen as just a North American-led initiative. I think what we're trying to do is find people who are having similar conversations around the world and within their own respective communities, and figuring out a way to kind of knit us together so that we're communicating and understanding what we're trying to do collectively. But certainly the North American group are fairly aligned in terms of values and movement going forward. But now we just need to find like-minded people around the world who again want to join us in these initiatives. And
do you see a digital component to this?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all have been forced to become media companies over the course of the pandemic, and we've been very good at creating digital content, whether that's video or audio or podcasts. And I think there are some really interesting ways to use technology to connect the two worlds. For example, I know Arup and others have done acoustic mapping of venues. So could you capture by video the Berlin Philharmonic performing in Berlin, but actually transfer the acoustic sound as it was coming through digitally into your space to make it sound like they were playing in your hall, and have a huge screen to broadcast them in instead of bringing 150 people over? How can you create the opportunity to connect the live and the virtual? One example, since Colette's in the room, we've had fun over the pandemic connecting a wonderful Indigenous fellow here at Stanford with Jacob Bohm, who's in residence at the Abbey. And they've been co-conspiring to create a whole podcast series looking at Indigenous elders in the arts. And I think the idea is that we'll have this digital component that combines the stories from both Australia and North America, but then there will be live components that happen in each of our respective communities. So it's a project that's very international in scope and scale and can live within each community, but doesn't necessarily mean that everybody is traveling back and forth. So there's all sorts of innovation, I think, that's coming out of this period. And I just think that people need to take a moment to think differently and to figure out all the things that we've learned, given that we've been isolated for so long, and take that practice into the way that we move forward.
That's where I was interested in, Chris, even our example. What you talked about was, even in the touring circuit, is that you have to think very differently locally, that you won't think of yourself as an exclusive venue. You will connect with your local fellow colleagues in the presenting field. So I'm just wondering how is the institution shifting? Because it's interesting, it is a shift, isn't it? And that to be global, you actually have to have your local context very well understood.
Yeah, I think that's one of the other benefits that's come out of COVID, is that it's really forced us to look at the artists within our own community and to think about projects in particular that involve potentially international artists, but also really are embedded in the community. And there's some great examples of that as well too. With we had Dance North from Australia over with their piece, a tractor, which was about combining local forces, so having the choreographers come in and work with the local community, and at the same time having some of the dancers from the company come as well. And I'm thinking a lot about that now, like how do you potentially bring a choreographer in to make work within your own local dance community, so that you get that international artistic vision, but without bringing the full forces of a full company over. And I think it's also important for us as we think through all this to realize that, we've had so many colleagues who are in their 20s and 30s who have just built these international networks, and that, touring for them in the way that we've been lucky enough to experience is something that in some ways we might have taken for granted. And I think we have to realize that as the shift changes, that those networks are as important to them coming up in the field as they were to us before. So how do we, again, figure out a way to maintain those and still have, it's not only about a Zoom call, it's also about that 4 hours of sitting in the bar and getting to know one another. So how do you find the balance of those two worlds as we try to be more responsible?
Yeah, we're all missing that this week for sure, that bar in New York. Colette, you're working on this, I think, every day in your organization. How do you look on Chris's plans?
Well, I think that I didn't even know about it, and I know Chris well, that there's a network that I could join. So I hope that others are feeling similarly, because as leaders, we can feel quite isolated, and there's a lot of challenges, isn't there, Chris, in trying to drive sustainability on every level, aesthetic development, community development, all of those things and how they interplay. So the more I think we can connect together, the more advocacy and support we can get as leaders. So I think there's a leadership development component to this, which is deeply valuable. How have you had that experience, Chris, and how has that helped drive you in your day-to-day work?
I mean, I think here what we're really trying to think about is how to bring, I'm lucky, I'm based in a university where we have access beyond the performing arts resources. And so we are, as we look, we're actually going to do a whole season in 22-23 around the idea of sustainability and wellness. Yeah. So bringing mental health into the conversation as well too. But one of the things we wanted to do was very early tap on to all the environmental science work that's happening on campus at the university, and to bring in student fellows who are both lovers of the arts, but also who are studying that, to try to figure out a way to make better connections and to learn from them, and to sort of think about ways in which we can make ourselves more accountable and set ourselves up to not only have the conversations with artists, but to think about how it informs our daily practice. So I think from a leadership perspective, we can certainly look at our colleagues in the arts and learn from one another, but I encourage people also to think about those community resources that are out there that should also be very much part of how we implement things.
Yeah, and leadership also comes from our community and our audiences as well. And as you said, from Indigenous elders. So looking beyond our field, looking at experts that, could be a local lover of your venue, I think is also critical. So how do you bring that conversation into the fore, as you said, in a way that isn't going to lead to polarization, but linking back to Alison's point, that leads to celebration and connection is going to be critical as well.
Yeah, and I think the tricky thing is as we have these conversations and push forward, we're pushing forward in the context of an economic crisis. We're pushing forward in the context of a racial inequity crisis in this country. So there are all these other things that are pulling at your attention, but I don't think you can separate them, and I think they're so linked in so many ways that we have to figure out a way to tackle all these issues and really think collectively about how to be the best we can.
So let me bring on everyone else to join this conversation, which I think is fascinating, and I'm quite sure that they might have questions for you as well. And we're back with the entire panel now. Again, thank you all for being part of this very important and inspiring conversation. And now that we've heard all the stories, I want to talk about the essence of it, which I think many of you have mentioned. And I'll just go around because Alison was the first. Alison, did you hear something today that made you happy and that was perhaps new to you and that you'll take back into your work as you move forward into 2021?
Lots and lots that has made me very happy. It's always terrific to have to feel that this community of new cultural practice is expanding with new voices, new perspectives, new dimensions. And I would just, I would really reiterate some of the key points that are being made about that really interesting dance between the global, having that sort of global connectivity with the issue, but actually really understanding what it means locally, that focus on that diversity of voices. I mean, lots of people have, it was really interesting to hear how every voice matters and every voice is meaningful, but to a different community. And that this is a movement. It's not a method or a process. It's a movement of change. And I heard that again and again. And also that wonderful word that I heard a lot of, which was about the value and the values and the difference between value and values, and how fundamental it is that we reframe that this is really an opportunity. And I heard that again and again, and I should definitely take that back. I will say one other thing, which is that we've been working in and with great friends in the USA for many years, but I am feeling really inspired by the USA because this once people in the USA pick this up, it really moves quickly. And I think it has been slow. There's no question about it. But if there is an energizing force that can build this movement into something different, I really think it will give me so much hope that we can actually, we can do something amazing here. And it's something amazing for culture as well as for climate and for people.
Wonderful, thank you. And Raj, did you hear new things, and did it make you reconsider?
Well, I heard a couple of things that remind me that advocacy beyond just the built portions of what we do is really important. I mean, Chris made a really important point about how do you, as arts organisations, I think there's a huge, and presenters, there's a huge opportunity to take what you're doing locally and be able to deliver it globally. Many of you have gone through, or many of our audience here have gone through the process of becoming producers during this whole thing and having to deliver content in a completely different way. But the technology is there to be able to do what Chris suggested, which is get a 3D microphone, get a 3D camera, place it in your venue or outside your venue or somewhere where you want to place it, and create an immersive experience that you can basically send anywhere at all. I think we've all seen a huge growth, growth in areas of our audiences that we never necessarily expected to see them. So that's a really, really great thing to have seen, great thing to have come out of this whole pandemic. But also that the equipment to broadcast this stuff is increasingly getting to the sort of level of extremely high quality, but consumer grade and relatively cheap. So I think there's a huge opportunity here for everybody to sort of really consider this offset of carbon by literally not traveling, but broadcasting much more widely. It reminded me of an experiment I did probably about 20 years ago now, where we set up a microphone in a field in Kansas, and it was an experimental version of a 3D microphone. So you could sit in a room in New York City, but be in this cornfield in Kansas, and you would hear the rolling thunderstorms coming through, and you would hear the flies, and you would hear the cows coming up to the microphone and stuff like that. But it was to connect to something that they really understood. It's inherently in people. So you can take those two extremes of things. I think your urban environment or your suburban or your rural environment and your arts, and you can bring them all together and do something with it. Again, I think we've heard a lot of sharing of stories here, and I can only emphasize more what I said, I think, in response to one of your questions, Maria, is that the more people share good examples of what they've been able to achieve, the more others are able to sort of pick up on and adopt those and use them for themselves. And I think that's the way that everybody learns, and we have to get much better at sharing those stories, I think.
Thank you. And Fabian and Rebecca. Fabian, first, do you recognize some of what we were talking about? We had talked about the conversation about the sustainability not being always easy. Does this help you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're as negative as it may seem, like this doomsday scenario might seem, I have an immense amount of hope. A couple of years ago, I attended the Climate Reality Conference hosted by Al Gore, and he said something that really struck home. He said, as a politician, what he's learned is that you can't have the whole loaf of bread. You have to take it one slice at a time. I would love to just take the whole loaf of bread and just fix everything overnight, but I do understand that there has to be a lot of strategy behind the progress that we make forward. One thing I will say that I hope happens more is just engaging in a very open and welcoming way with sacrifice zones, which are areas throughout the world where hugs live, historically underserved groups. That's something that's very close to my heart. When we left Cuba and got to the United States, we were very poor. We lived in a trailer park, and there's just not enough communication in the way that it needs to be with disenfranchised people, and they're the ones that are suffering the most.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that in. I am going to move on. I want to give Rebecca a chance. Did you hear some potential partners, Rebecca?
Absolutely. This is really, really inspiring to feel like we're not alone in trying to move the needle on this topic. And I know we're pressed for time, and I just want to share an idea that actually is a friend of mine's, Laura Kaminsky, this composer that I've worked a lot with. And when it comes up, that making these changes, it can be framed as sacrifices or a burden, and it can feel like that. There's enough to do to just stay alive as artists. But if you reframe that in your mindset as an offering to the future, that is headed our way. Are we going to be headed towards resilience and vibrancy by our own design, or are we going to meet more and more obstruction? It can be a helpful framework. So I just thought I would leave that thought with the group.
Wonderful, thank you. I think Colette and Chris, can you do a one sentence essence for us?
I think we were last to go, so we had the benefit of hearing all those before us and sort of touched on a lot of that. But the other thing that I'm thinking a lot about just in parting is the idea of the impact of climate change on the refugee community and how that's fundamentally going to shift culture over the next little while as well too. So that's something else that's very top of mind for me these days.
All right. And Colette, one sentence, APAP is already breathing down my neck.
I will end with, I think that there's a lot of pressure on artists to do a lot of pivoting and a lot of the heavy lifting in this space. So I call on all of us, and I'm taking on the challenge of how I can rethink our business model so that artists have time and space to recreate the way they want to engage with the world and their communities. And Chris, I'll be joining your network.
That's wonderful. So thank you all. I have to wrap up. Conclusion, I think we've identified some essential when it comes to working on climate change. Our sector can play a profound role in realizing transformation and reimagining what is needed. To quote from Julie Bicycle's call to action, transform your work and become a champion for environmental sustainability. And that is where the networks can play such an important role by being champions themselves, by keeping the topic on the agenda, by challenging us as leaders in the cultural field to step up and take our responsibility, not just for the sake of our own sector, but for the sake of the earth and society at large. So thank you. Thank you for making this conversation possible today. Huge thanks to all the speakers and all of you in the audience for being so active in the chat. I apologize for not being able to answer all your questions, but I know it's been active. Keep the conversation going with each other. Big thanks to APAP, ISPA, CNMA, and the Drama League for inviting us to do this session today. I wish you all a really productive and inspiring day at all the January conferences. Bye-bye.
Thank you for such an inspiring conversation. I hope everyone left inspired and motivated. APAP has a very large commitment to continuing this conversation. I'm a proud fellow of the Creative Climate Leadership Forum that Julie's Bicycle launched this year in the US. So we will be doing more of these conversations and looking how we can facilitate information sharing, learning, and networking across the field so that we can be much more sustainable and less extractive as a field writ large. So tomorrow we want to just headline that we'll have some more of these field-wide conversations talking about how we need to use the opportunity that we have right now in this liminal space, downtime, to reimagine our field and its equity and how we treat each other. And so we look forward to having you be a part of that tomorrow morning and tomorrow afternoon, and to finally capping our time together with the amazing Yo-Yo Mom. So thank you so much for today. We hope you had a wonderful time. Enjoy the pitch sessions that'll follow here. Continue to get to our showcases, continue to visit the Expo Hall virtual booths, and continue networking with each other. This has been a great platform, and we've heard lots of great stories about connections that you're making. So thanks again, and have a great day.